family and friends of persons who have lost loved ones in this particular crisis. We are definitely going through a rough period in this time, and our heart goes out to our fellow countrymen and women.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Gill, let's look at the Reparations Committee. From doing research preparing for this program, I understand that the association was launched almost a year ago. So how would you say the last year has been for the committee getting up and running and getting things in place for its objectives, its mission?
Well, about a year ago, March 2020, pursuant to a cabinet conclusion, what we established, first of all, was the preparatory committee for the Emancipations Commission. In other words, myself as chair, Dr. Nicole Dow, Peter Antwine, Dr. Damian Greaves, and Mr. Claude Douglas was given a mandate by cabinet to look at how best we can establish a National Reparations Committee / Commission, whatever word we want to use. Because, of course, our work is part of the mandate taken by CARICOM heads in 2013. In 2013, or thereabouts, CARICOM took the decision to establish a CARICOM Reparations Commission, with every member state establishing a committee or commission by themselves. Now, unfortunately, and for different reasons, Grenada was one of the few nations that were lagging behind, so to speak. And government thought it necessary that we need to be brought up to speed to satisfy our mandate and our obligations to CARICOM, as well as to our people. And as such, a year ago, we established a preparatory committee where we would have looked at the guidelines, look at the mandate, look at the possible structure of how we're going to set up this commission, how big, how small, and so on and so forth. And in March this year, Cabinet has approved our proposals, and we now became a fully fledged reparations committee. So in speaking, the committee has been established there about around the 25th of March, 2020. And so we moved from the stage of preparatory committee to now the full committee. And the full committee has been established in March or so. But it then took a couple other weeks or so to get all the appointments sorted out and to put our structures in place. But I can say that we are now up and running. Of course, there are a lot more steering work that we need to do to establish office and so on, which is our vision, but that will take time. Of the pandemic crisis, of course, has affected our work. We do meet virtually every month and so, but naturally, as in everything else from last year to now, the pandemic is affecting how we do our work. I mean, we have not been able to meet in person. We have not been able to do quite a lot of the programs. We want to do community outreach programs and so on to highlight and to educate and so on. And that will come in time. Some of it maybe have to be done virtually as well. So for this year, after the establishment of the committee, we have done or participated in two major events. On May 19th, we did a webinar, a massive lecture, and as you may know, May is a significant month for Grenada. In that on the 19th of May, Malcolm is a birth date of Malcolm X, and a few weeks later, with the 29th, I believe, if I get it right, is Maurice Bishop's birthday. So we had our first major event in May of this year. We called it Malcolm, Maurice, and the Movement for Reparations in Grenada. We did that on the 19th of May. Our guest speaker was Dr. Ron Daniels, as the president of the International Black World and also the chairperson of the Reparations Commission here in the United States of America. And that was our first major webinar. Excellent. Well, we had an excellent presentation as well as participation from Grenadians at home as well as right through the diaspora. And again, we were able to partner with the Grenada Cultural Foundation and CEDU with regards to implementing another webinar for our emancipation celebrations on the 1st of August. And on that emancipation webinar, we had young Rihanna Bruno, who participated as a youth representative in that webinar. And sadly, we have heard of her passing last week. And I believe that Grenada has lost a champion, brilliant young mind. And Rihanna, we've had discussions since then of her joining us on the committee as a youth representative and so on, and assisting us with the work. But unfortunately, we have lost the honor and the privilege of her joining us in our efforts. So allow me to stick a pin and to say condolences to the family and to her friends and to her classmates, to her teachers, and so on and so forth.
We also join you in once again extending condolences to those who would mourn her passing. The Reparations Committee, there are still people who don't know what reparations is all about. How would you define reparations and the mandate of the committee, and how does that translate into helping descendants of our enslaved ancestors?
Very good question. And I appreciate misgivings that not everybody is accurate speak about reparations. In fact, when we speak reparations, people think that we are going to ask in cap in hand and go to the government in England and France and Holland and so on and say, put money in our hat. You have to pay us for our grandfather's labor. Well, the reparation struggle is much more than that. If I may just read from what the mandate of CARICOM and the mandate of the CRC, which is the CARICOM Reparations Commission, because Grenada Reparations Committee is part of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which is led by well-known Professor Dr. Hilary Beckles. And our task is to establish the moral, ethical, and legal case for the payment of reparations by the governments of all colonial powers and institutions of those countries to the nations and people of the Caribbean community for the crimes against humanity of native genocide, the transatlantic slave trade, and the racialized system of chattel slavery. So in explaining, one, everyone appreciates the colonial powers, the France, Portugal, Great Britain, Holland, Netherlands, and so, right? And so we know of the colonial powers. There are also institutions that benefited from the slave trade and slavery. Those are banks in England, insurance companies, churches, universities, and so on. Now, if you follow anything about the reparations struggle, you will see that a lot of the persons, for instance, families in England and so, who had owned plantations in the Caribbean, had owned slaves. What they would have done from time to time was to give sponsorships, for instance, to major universities in Europe and in the United States of America. And those profits were on the back of enslaved persons. One, what is to note is not just the nations that the colonial powers, but also the institutions within these colonial powers that benefited from the slave trade and slavery. Now, also, what is important to note as well, this is not just about we as the descendants of enslaved persons. Our first task also, we owe an obligation to what we refer to as the first peoples of the Caribbean, the Amerindians. In Grenada's case, the Kalinago, and the infamous story of Leapers Hill, where basically what happened there was mass genocide of the early settlers of Grenada. And we still do have descendants of the Kalinago people in Grenada, right? Now, these persons as well need to be compensated because they own the lands that Dupake and the French took from them, and later the British. So let us not forget the first peoples of Grenada, the first peoples of the Caribbean. They are also part of this struggle for reparation. So we have the Kalinagos in Grenada, and I'm speaking in terms of trying to make it relevant to Grenada, but we're speaking also of the Arawaks, wherever, the Tainos and so on, all of the first peoples of the region, the Carifunas in St. Vincent and Belize and so on, all of the first peoples. They are part of this discussion. They are part of this struggle. And we have the enslaved Africans. Now, you ask, so that you have the transatlantic slave trade, we had about what? 3.1 million people, Africans, been transported from Africa to the so-called New World, to the Americas, in a horrific trade. About only 2.7 million or thereabouts, and all these figures is estimates, of course, made it to our shores. What it means is that a lot of Africans would have died on that transatlantic trade in the hulls of these ships and so on. They were thrown overboard if the vessel was deemed unsafe and so on and so forth. So all of that needs to be taken into account. Now, in terms of how it's going to benefit our people now, today, the relevance of what we speak of in terms of reparations, CARICOM has come up, the CRC has come up with what is referred to as a CARICOM 10-point plan. And that is extremely important. That in many ways is our Bible in terms of how we look at the reparation struggle. One, we demand a full formal apology from the colonial powers and these institutions which I spoke about. Generally, there has been an admission that slavery and the slave trade is crimes against humanity. But we need a formal apology and acknowledgement from the colonial powers and these institutions that what they have done is wrong. You know? So we need that full formal apology. Second, the issue of repatriation. So I'm going to list out to you the 10-point plan of the CRC, which is adopted by the committee and which is more or less the Bible of our reparative struggle. So when persons ask what it is that you want with this reparation struggle, we say to them, one, we want a full formal apology. Two, repatriation of Africans. So over 10 million Africans and so on were taken from their homelands, brought to this so-called New World. For years, we have heard Rastafarians in particular championing they want to go back to Africa. Some of us would have scolded them, laughed at them, and so on. Say, who wants to go back to Africa? But when we speak of repatriation, we are saying to the colonial powers, for those of us who want to return, you must be saddled with the financial burden of ensuring that they go back. You took them from their homelands, right? So it is for persons who wish to return. We're not saying that we're going to abandon the Caribbean and send everybody of African descent back to Africa. No, that's not the argument. We are saying that for persons who wish to return, right, we must not rule out the fact that some of us may wish to go back and make a living in our homelands back in Africa. And persons over the years have done that. And we are saying that in case of persons who want to return to Africa, live in Nigeria, in Kenya, wherever they want to settle, the colonial powers will put the structure in place and bear the financial burden of relocating these persons, repatriating these persons. Thirdly, an Indigenous Peoples Development Program. Now, for instance, if you look at the Kalinagos, there are major Kalinago community in Dominica, for instance, and the years and through best efforts of the governments there, they have the area which is called Kalinago territory, but also to our indigenous peoples, we need to make serious investment in education, in healthcare, in providing jobs and so on for these indigenous persons. And we are saying to the colonial powers and so on that to pay or to compensate for the genocide, wanton killings of the indigenous peoples, you must fund a development program for the indigenous peoples. So that is our third. That is the third point on our 10-point plan. Cultural institutions. European nations have invested in the development of community institutions such as museums, research centers, and so on. We are asking for that. In fact, many of our artifacts, a lot of our history is in museums and libraries and so on, all across Europe. In fact, if you want to research certain aspects of Grenada history, you cannot research Grenada properly if you do not go to London to research Grenada properly. And we are saying that the time has come where the former colonial powers must invest in our cultural institutions here in the Caribbean and in Grenada, in our case. Now, you would have, for instance, just last week, and to show you how significant and how powerful this repatriation struggle is getting. In Holland, just last week, they announced that all fees will be waived for persons who want to change their names. So you will appreciate that as a direct result of slavery and the slave trade, for African descent, we carry Western names, European names, and so on and so forth, that have absolutely no relation to our culture. And so compare that to the Indians who came across under the system of indentureship. Generally, the Indians continue to have their Indian names and a large part of the culture with them. So in Holland last week, for instance, the announcement was made that all fees will be waived for the administration of persons who wish to change their names. It will at no cost to them. And that, to me, is a significant, again, part of the struggle. Countries recognizing what they have done, and in some ways, they are making amendments to it. Of course, that is not enough. We want much more. But I'm just highlighting that these things are happening in the former colonial countries. Public health crisis. Now, as a direct result of slavery, we in the Caribbean suffers from some of the most chronic health conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, and so on and so forth. And that's because of our diet. The diet which was given to our forefathers, and that was handed down to us. So that you'll find that some of the chronic illnesses that we as a Caribbean people suffer from is a direct result of slavery. And we are saying to the former colonial powers that you must assist in affording us the best health care possible. In other words, research for medicine, deal with the issue of diabetes and high blood pressure and so on, assisting us in upgrading our healthcare system. That is important. And even right now, we can see the effects of our health system and the impact of this COVID pandemic. I read an article just on the weekend where a study was done by Harvard University, which says that if repatriation was done, it would have saved the lives of millions of persons, of Black persons in the US. In other words, they would have been able to get better medication for the health conditions. They would have been able to access better health care and so on and so forth if in the US, in the United States, reparations were given to Africans, and they did that in the state of Louisiana. So we are saying one of our demands to the former colonial countries is to assist with regards to our public health. Illiteracy eradication. I don't have to speak much about it because I think it speaks for itself in a real sense. Our education system. any student of history would know, not even student of history, growing up and so on, any of our grandparents and great-grandparents and so on, before they turned 13 and 14 years, work to support their families because of poverty. And some of them never enjoyed primary education. Needless to say that secondary school education in the 60s and 70s continued. People had to get scholarships and so on to go to secondary schools. I mean, we have made great strides. A lot of us now, a lot of families and so on, we have university graduates and so on. But let's not be mistaken. That was not always the case. And more than that, we did more of our people going over to universities and studying all different areas of national importance. So illiteracy eradication is important to us. Africa Knowledge Program. When we speak about Africa, as I am doing now, I am certain that there are persons thinking and saying, what's wrong with Ali Gill and them with this African thing? You don't see what Africa is on the news. Not appreciating that what we see on CNN and BBC and so on is not all the times the best of Africa. Africa had a great civilization before the Europeans went there and destroyed their civilization. You just need to read the work of Walter Rodney and these great academics who wrote on these issues, you see, so that it is extremely important that our people educate themselves with regards to the issue of Africa. Psychological rehabilitation, that's on our 10-point plan. Technology transfer, that's another point on our 10-point plan. You know, Grenada, we're celebrating 48 years of independence next year, God's willing. And that is we still a young country, right? I mean, Great Britain, United States, other colonial powers and so on, you know, they have been established and have stable societies for centuries maybe. And so that they are more advanced. We are saying that it is sort of unreasonable for a 47-year-old country to catch up with a country in terms of technology that has been established 2 centuries ago. And as such, we are saying, for us to come up to speed, we need the assistance of the former colonial powers to transfer the technology to us. In other words, we're not looking to invent the wheel. We need assistance in healthcare, in education, in whatever other areas of technology. And we're asking that that's one way in which they can transfer that the present technology that they have into our societies. So that point is critical, because when persons think we're going for just cash, we're not just talking about cash. We're talking about different areas of assistance as well. Debt cancellation. We have our small societies are indebted to these colonial powers for years that we struggling to meet our debt obligations. And that is not by accident. If you take the case of Haiti, for instance, Haiti had to pay France. In those days, around 90 million francs, which in today's dollar may work out to about $2.1 billion from 1825 for the independence. Imagine a people that struggled and fought to end slavery to begin with, and secondly, to gain their independence. They had to pay France for France to guarantee that they would not invade them and that they would recognize their governments and so on. So that the poverty of Haiti is not an accident. The monies that they would have paid to France over all these years, in fact, they had to take a loan from French banks to pay the French government. The money that they would have paid to France over all those years could have built their roads, their bridges, their education system, and the healthcare. So the poverty that we are witnessing in Haiti is not by accident. So debt cancellation for us is a big issue. For us to get a fresh start, right? It is important that colonial powers consider and to cancel the of CARICOM countries that we have with them. It is a legacy of slavery, that how the economies are established, that we always seem to be going to them for assistance. We build their cities. We build the highways and byways of London, Paris, and so on and so forth, right? With the free labor of our forefathers. In fact, at the end of the abolition of slavery, the British government paid or compensated the slave owners £20 million. The slave owners were compensated £20 million for the loss of property. What was the loss of that property? The enslaved persons. Could you imagine that the slave owners was paid by the British government £20 million? The British government took loans from banks and different institutions, and they only paid back those loans. Those loans were completely paid back in the year 2015. So what we're talking about is not too far-fetched, but it is current. So if you pay the slave owners for loss of their labor, it's only fair that you pay the laborers themselves. That's a historical injustice, which we believe must be made right by the colonial powers. So, Blossom, you can see concretely how this reparative struggle would impact the lives of young persons and persons who are alive now because of the work of the CRC, the structures that are put in place, and people must appreciate that it's not just a matter of going and tell England or what have you that, in fact, in the Belgian Congo, the government of Belgium has offered to pay the Congolese government, I can't recall the exact figure off my head, some millions of dollars for the genocide. They have now admitted, Belgium has now admitted that they have committed genocide against the Belgian people. And they have offered to pay reparations in the sum of some millions of dollars. And the Congolese government said, no, it's not accepted. It's not for you to do us what you want, and then again decide how much you're going to pay us or the terms and conditions of your reparations. No, we have to sit down on the table and to discuss that. And that happened just last month or thereabouts. So all these issues are current now. There are tremendous strides that have been made throughout the world on this issue of reparations. I hope I've answered your question. A bit long-winded, but I think I'm grateful for the time that you have afforded me to go through the 10-point plan and to say to persons, no, we have an open mind when we speak with regards to the reparations struggle. It's not just about cash and money and so on and so forth. It's much more than. Thank you very much.
So of the 10 points on the plan, what efforts have been made to get them? The apology, the compensation, the land back. Is it just a black and white on pen and paper, or have we made steps to get those things? Any one of them, at least.
Right. So it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And we have made tremendous progress. Now the issue of reparations is being tabled at the United Nations. Dr. Hilary Beckles has addressed the UN. He has spoken all over Europe and the United States with regards to this issue of reparations. In fact, Dr. Beckles is the foremost scholar on this issue in the world on the issue of reparations. And we have been making strides. So it's not black and white people, it's simply our guide as to how we go forward with the work. And some certain things have already happened. We've had universities in England that is partnering with the University of the West Indies, for instance, to offer a master's program on the issue of reparations. We've had institutions making donations to the University of the West Indies, and so on and so forth. So stride by stride, we have not been able yet to, of course, we have not reached our goal of achieving all of the points on this 10-point plan. But I think we have made tremendous strides in that. One is an issue now that is discussed at the highest level of global governance at the United Nations. On the 20th of later this month, we'll have the Durban Plus 20, where, in Durban 20 years ago, South Africa had this full discussion on the issue of reparations, the issue of Black justice, the issue of slavery and the slave trade. And we now have what is called AFCA, Association of African and CARICOM States at the United Nations, which coincidentally is now chaired by Ambassador Maguire from Grenada. Just a couple of weeks ago, they had a conference in Dominica with regards to the issue of the slave trade and reparations, so that bit by bit, the issue of reparations is entering global dialogue. And we believe that just in time, we will be able to achieve our objectives.
What about young people's participation? Unfortunately, we lost Rihanna, whom you describe as a young, brilliant mind. But what about other young people? How are they getting involved in reparatory justice, even being on the committee, or even not even on the committee, but assisting and working along with everybody in this journey?
Good. So as I said, we just officially now started in March of this year. And we are good. One of the first things we have to do with our young people is education. So we're looking, as school is now reopening, although we're doing virtual, but within the next month or two, we will be starting a public lecture series in the schools, aimed at the young people to bring them up to speed with the issues of reparation. That to our mind is one of the first steps that we have to make. We have to educate in the schools persons with regards to the issue of reparations. Secondly, when I was in school, and maybe you too lost some history, the subject of history was a big thing, We find that in recent times that less and less of our Caribbean students are attempting history at the CXC level. And the CRC we are lobbying for the subject of history to, if at least not been made compulsory subject, but it is taught at every form in every school and so on. So that we have to put back the study of history front and center on the school curriculum, but not necessarily how history was taught. And that's one of the issues as well. You would appreciate that when we went to school many moons ago, we learned a lot about Christopher Columbus. We learned a lot about Francis Drake and so on and so forth, and very little about our own history, about our own struggles and so on, our own heroes, our own heroines, so that there needs to be a fundamental restructuring of how history has been taught in the schools and how we bring our young people up to speed and so on and so forth with all of these issues. So that we will be starting the Grenada Reparations Committee would be partnering with secondary schools to begin it. We also want to go to the primary schools with this lecture series on the issue of reparative justice. That's the first step. Now, within the Grenada Reparations Committee, we have a committee dedicated to young persons. And as I said, well, we have lost Rihanna. Rihanna was our shining light on that issue. But we now have to identify other young persons who are interested, who are motivated, because trust me, we didn't have to motivate Rihanna anymore. She took it up and ran. And you're looking for that kind of character from young persons, because really and truly, we are voluntary organizations. So we are looking for persons with the passion, persons with the knowledge, of course, as well. I mean, it's an ongoing, so we are learning as we're going ahead. So I don't know, maybe persons who are listening to your program and so on and interested can make contact with one of us. And certainly, we're looking to engage young persons. But, of course, we have to be a little careful in this time with the COVID and so on, so that we cannot do as much as we want. Mostly it's virtual things are happening now. We have a lot of ideas of how to engage our young people. We could do a reparations run. and so on, go to reparations in the schools. But we have to be a bit guarded as to what we can do and what we cannot do in this time because of the pandemic, of course.
Mr. Gill, let's take a break and then we're going to come back and continue the discussion as well as open the platform for our viewers and listeners who may have comments and questions. This is To The Point. We're speaking with Chairman of Grenada's National Reparations Committee, Ambassador Arley Gill. We'll be right back.
CPL T20 is back. Catch all the smashing action from St. Kitts and Nevis, August 26 to September 15
on GBN.
Play. Looking for that injection of vibes and energy, of course. Well, I've got just that. Hi, my name is Gary, Mr. Smooth, and I'm inviting you to join me on the Hot Morning Show on Hot 98.5, 98.7 FM. Weekdays, Monday to Friday, 6 to 10 in the morning. I've got a healthy dose of your favorite and most infectious hits sampled with information, news, laughter, and all the other ingredients that go into making the hottest morning show on the radio, the Morning Heat. And while you're at it, don't forget to hit us up on WhatsApp, 435-7517. We've got topics, we've got discussions, calls, voice notes, and so much more. But I can't tell you everything. You gotta tune in. The Hot Morning Show on Hot FM, 98.5, 98.7. With yours truly, Gary, Mr. Smooth. Kaboom!
Feel good facts.
Help prevent cold and flu by washing your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. That's the time it takes to remove most germs. No soap and water? No worries when you've got alcohol-based hand sanitizer.
Hey folks, you're invited to tune in to Grenada Music to the World program hosted by Eugene Gittens on Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on Classic Radio 105.5, 105.9, Hot FM 98.5, 98.7, GBN TV and all their social media platforms. The only totally local music program in Grenada, representing all genres of music. So it's Green's Music to the World on Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on GBN with the music icon himself, Mr. Eugene Gittens. See you then.
As GBN brings you coverage of this year's Hero CPL, there will be some adjustments to our programming lineup. On match days, transitions will be aired from 5:25 p.m. and GBN TV News will be aired from 6 p.m. and repeated following the CPL game. GBN, with you anywhere and everywhere with sports coverage.
Welcome back to The Point. We're speaking with Chairman of Grenada National Reparations Committee, Ambassador Arley Gill. Let's now go to our viewers and listeners who may have comments, questions, queries, concerns. The landline number 435-2041. That's also the WhatsApp number. Please, only written messages on WhatsApp, and you can continue to post on Facebook and YouTube. Let's go to our first caller. Good morning, caller.
Yeah, morning, Blossom, morning to your listeners, and morning to your guest, Ambassador Arley Gill. I will agree with the Ambassador that we are late in some of the whole process, but I hope that time doesn't disallow us from getting certain things right. Now, there's a lot of things to have a whole paper that will take issues with. But first of all, I want to say that if we are serious, first thing we can do to boost confidence is, first of all, I want the ambassador to urge the administration to restore the emancipation holiday, which they swapped for colonial cricket a few years ago. It's something that burdens me, that hurts me almost on a daily basis. Restore the holiday. All right? First of all. Secondly, we need to understand that the people we negotiate with or the people we go after, they're not the real people with power. The people who we go after, they are the public relations officers for the people with power. The people with power are the businesses, the owners, the people who have, who do things, who make, and I'll give you an example like that. in the case of the climate change issue, a lot of nice things like the Paris Accord is reached. But can governments implement that when the business decides who will do this and that? We need to look at that from that point of view. Also, there's a few things we can do in the meantime. We need to end the food apartheid system. I mean, people, there's a food apartheid system. We need to also consider how we have adopted the class system, which continues to divide our people. I'm glad he mentioned psychological reparation, schooling technology, and so on, because there are, within even the African psyche still, there's still some things that we can do and do excellently without necessarily relying on external things.
Okay.
No, please, just give me 2 minutes, please. That's the difficulty I have. When we talk about reparation, we don't talk about ecological debt. The debt which would apply to both the indigenous people here and those people who got here. The environment was decimated. Even though we're still doing it, we're cutting down ecosystem to plant cane for the same people. So that's one. We also need to restore the way we understand Africans. We have this trained negative thing. For instance, you mentioned Haiti and voodoo and evil and so on. When I went to Haiti, people asked me if I'm afraid. These are the things we need to help people understand.
Okay.
Wait, please. Just give me 1 moment.
I can't give you more time. You've had a lot of time, and other people would like to contribute as well. So thank you very much, caller.
No problem.
Mr. Gill?
Yes, Blossom, I'm here. I could not hear the caller clearly, but I saw you was making notes, so I hope you can.
Yeah, the first one I have is to ask the administration to restore the emancipation holiday. He made a comment that we're going behind the people without power, or we should be going behind people with power, and to end the apartheid system. Those are the 3 notes that I took.
The apartheid system where?
I don't think he specified where.
Yeah. With regards to the emancipation holiday, we do have the emancipation holiday. It's celebrated in Grenada the first Monday
in August.
Every year. Over the years, that has been confused with Rainbow City celebrations, and persons growing up may very well would have mistaken that holiday for Rainbow City celebrations, but the first Monday in August in Grenada continues to be a holiday, and we enjoyed that this year. I know that there was a second holiday, the Tuesday and so on, and some years ago that was removed, but it does not impact the emancipation celebrations or the meaning of emancipation, because really and truly we do have our emancipation holiday in Grenada still. So that is there still. In terms of the apartheid, I cannot speak to it because I'm not sure he was referencing to where. In Grenada, and so basically is a homogeneous society in terms of 80% is of African descent, and so we really do not have that sort of issue in Grenada at this time. But just to say too that the Indian government as well is extremely supportive of the CRC, of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, and the Indians government have been giving us, providing us with support and encouragement in our reparative struggle as well.
A question on Facebook. Somebody asked, will we be speaking to African countries as well? Since many chiefs and rulers were in cohorts with the white slave traders, will we be asking them for free lands in Africa for those who decide to return?
No, not like that. In fact, just last week, we've had the first summit of African and CARICOM leaders. That was our first, and that was a massive undertaking from CARICOM and the AU. And let me say that we're excited about the links that CARICOM is now establishing with African countries. Last week as well, we have an ambassador from Barbados to Kenya, which is another first. So that with CARICOM states and African states, and then we have AFCA, as I spoke about earlier, that is headed by Ambassador Maguire in the United Nations. So there is now an excellent and improving diplomatic relations between Africa and CARICOM countries. And that the reparations, the issue of reparations is being brought to African states as well for critical support going forward. That is on the agenda between the CARICOM heads and the African heads. Now, let me say this, and that has been, every time we speak about slavery and we speak about reparations and so on, this issue always comes up with regards to, African chiefs, persons in Africa selling Africans into slavery. What about them? Now, let us be absolutely clear that the slavery which was practiced here in the Caribbean was not practiced anywhere else. What you had here was chattel slavery, where our forefathers was considered a piece of property. They were not considered to be human beings. They were considered a piece of property to be bought and sold, just like any goods you find in a shop. Now, some persons say, well, there has been slavery in other countries. No, slavery in other countries and other societies as well. Blacks have been, but we have to be absolutely clear on the fact that what we had in the Caribbean is chattel slavery, where our forefathers were seen as a piece of property. And these, their labor, the work that they did here in Africa, in the Caribbean, is what built the major cities in Europe. And, it was the pre-industrial stage of development. And it is the resources that the UK and Portugal and so on received from these so-called plantations in the New World that spurred the Industrial Revolution and indeed the development. So let's be absolutely clear on that. Secondly, let us not be misguided with the divide and rule now of the Europeans on the African continent by engaging different ethnic groups of Africans to fight, arming them to fight against each other and to providing them with captured persons. So that, yes, it is part of the history that you have African persons on the African continent who would have acted as they captured Africans and then sold them to European traders. But the fact of the matter is that there would not have been such a market to sell your fellow man if there was not a purchaser. If nobody was buying, then you can't sell, fundamentally. And it is no excuse, and what these persons would have done is wrong, of course. No one is condoning them, no one is defending that. I'm not defending it, and so on. It is part of so that the slave trade process, a legacy of the slave trade process is that it had African persons capturing their brothers and sisters and selling them into slavery. That's a legacy of the slave trade and slavery. And here again, the colonial powers are responsible for that. And the institutions, they are the ones responsible. You see? So that we really and truly must lay the claim on the footsteps of the European powers. They are responsible for all of that. And we cannot then, lose focus and to say, well, Africans sell themselves to sell their brothers and sisters and so on into slavery and so on. It is what that was created by the colonial powers, and we cannot escape it. They created the market, They provided the firearms and so on. And obviously, the colonial powers are responsible for the purchase of these persons and so on and so forth. And they created that entire culture.
I don't know if I missed it, but did we attend the summit, the Historic Africa Summit?
Oh, yes. Prime Minister Michel attended.
Okay. Somebody on Facebook was inquiring. All right. Let me go to WhatsApp as we're running out of time. Somebody on WhatsApp says, I am a history teacher. As a history teacher, I am not clear why an apology is needed because it was the evil act that created such a beautiful Caribbean. I know many others will differ. Out of evil came beautiful.
I disagree fundamentally with that history teacher. And I believe that, yes, the Caribbean is beautiful, but the slave trade was wrong. And as such, an apology must be warranted. Slavery was wrong. And as such, an apology must be warranted. So we have created for ourselves in the Caribbean a beautiful civilization. That's without doubt. Our culture, we have done well for ourselves. But but that must not provide an excuse for those who enslaved our forefathers. That's not an excuse for those who enslaved us. The slave trade was wrong. It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against humanity to kidnap them from their homes and bring them to this land and to enslave them and to treat them as a piece of property. Yes? So that is what the apology is about. The apology is that the European colonial powers must apologize for these crimes against humanity. They must acknowledge that it was wrong. Acknowledge it, that, slave trade, slavery was wrong. Acknowledge it and an apology. So that I will say to my dear history teacher that despite the beautiful civilization that we have here in Grenada and throughout the Caribbean, how our society was created, it was created on some fundamental historical crimes that the criminals must pay their due. And it can begin and should begin with an apology and an acknowledgement that it was wrong. That's what we are saying. So let's not give them an excuse because we have done well for ourselves.
What happens from here, both with the Grenada Committee, Reparations Committee, as well as the CARICOM Reparations Committee? What's the next step in achieving any one of those points on the 10-point plan?
Quite a lot. Later in this month, we would have, as I said, the Durban Plus 20 commemorations at the United Nations, which is another platform for us to continue to struggle for reparative justice. We are further trying to deepen our relationship with the African continent, with the EU. We see that as a strategic development. And as I said, we do have strategic support from our Indian brothers and sisters as well. Going forward is to continue to do the work. We have a lot of work to do, and part of that work and part of that struggle is to educate our own people with regards to this reparative justice. We have a lot of things that we need to get right. Soon we will be lobbying, and we have started lobbying the government, for instance, in Grenada, to rename streets, villages, communities that now enjoy the names of former slave owners and persons who would have benefited from the slave trade. We believe that these names must be changed. We are doing the research as we speak so that we can present, and we want to walk along with the government with regards to renaming these streets and these communities and so on that really and truly has done a disservice to our history. persons who would have enslaved our forefathers, they have received this high accolade in our modern society. And we're saying enough of that. So we are putting together a proposal for government to work with government to see how best we can restructure that part of our history and make it right. You would have followed sometime last year, the Lord Nelson statue in Barbados was pulled down. And all over in the US and so on, some of these figures and so on that reminded us of the oppressor. A lot of them was pulled down unceremoniously. So that the George Floyd movement and the Black Lives Matter movement has sparked some interest in that line. Now in Grenada, we may not have no statue to pull down, but we believe the monumental landscape of Grenada, right? Could one ever believe that an area like Monserrates, Leapers Hill, right, or forced people and so on? We talk about the genocide of the Kalinago people. It's something that we need to look at, and so on. So there's a lot of work for us to do as well. It's not just simply receiving benefits from the former colonial powers, but we ourselves as a people, we must look within to see how best we can emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. So, Blossom, there's a lot of work to be done in stages. We will be here next year and the year after for sure, having that discussion. But just to say that I believe that we are making incremental progress. The subject of reparations is reverberating globally. I mean, this is probably, and that movement is testimony to the fact that I'm here on your program this morning. The issue of reparations, for instance, was never a national issue. But here we are on GBN this morning discussing this issue of reparations. That, for us, is a victory in itself.
Appreciate your appearance this morning, Ambassador Gill. Thank you very much. Looking forward to hearing more works accomplished by the committee and looking forward to greater things as we continue to fight for reparations, not only in Grenada, but across the Caribbean and the rest of the world, actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. And as I said, I'm honored. My committee is honored to be invited to your program, and we are grateful for the opportunity afforded to us. In closing, allow me once again to encourage persons to be vaccinated. That is critical at this time. I believe that the vaccination is the game changer, basically. That is the game changer. And the onus lies on each and every one of us to be vaccinated. I've been vaccinated a long time ago, fully vaccinated. And I want to encourage all of my fellow citizens that, you have a choice. Of course, you have a choice. But exercise that choice to be vaccinated, because it is the only game changer. I mean, those of you who may have a condition, speak to your doctor and so on, but I believe it is the only game changer. So I want to, strongly encourage all of our nationals to do the right thing. And of course, obey the protocols. Wear your mask, sanitize, social distance, stay home, avoid unnecessary congregating and so on and so forth. But above all else, let's be vaccinated. So thank you very much, Blossom, and you have a wonderful day, you and the listeners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gill. You enjoy yours as well and continue to stay safe. Chairman of Grenada's National Reparations Committee, Ambassador Arley Gill. We thank him very much for being our guest, and thank you, viewers and listeners, for tuning into the program. Always appreciate your listenership and your viewership. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your company. That brings us to the end of my time here in Classic and GBN. It's time for me to head on out, but I'll be back tomorrow morning, God willing. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Continue to be safe. Remember, the protocols are in place. COVID-19 is still very much out there. We are continuing the contact tracing efforts. We are continuing to try to keep this situation under control. It is far from over. I don't want to hear one of my viewers or my listeners is among the new cases or hospitalized cases. So please do what you need to stay safe. If you don't need to leave home, don't leave home. Enjoy the rest of your Monday and see you tomorrow morning, God willing.